Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Palmer. Tonight we're speaking about grassroots efforts to combat climate change. With me is Tom Kelly, the founder and director of KyotoUSA. Tom, thank you.
Nice to be here, Tom. Thanks for having me.
All right. So tell me about your organization.
Well, we're here in Berkeley, and we got started in 2005, and essentially we thought it was important that we try to do something at a local level about climate change. You may recall that in 2005, the Kyoto Protocol was ratified by Russia. They were the last big vote on that, and that actually then put the Kyoto Protocol into effect. However, the United States has, never really supported the Kyoto Protocol, so it was our feeling that if we were ever going to get anything going in this country, we were going to have to start at the grassroots and see if we could push it up. So in 2005, we asked the city of Berkeley to ratify the Kyoto Protocol. And the city did. They agreed to adopt the criteria that was laid out in that international agreement. And we then started asking other cities in the Bay Area to adopt it as well. And fortunately, the mayor of Seattle, Greg Nichols, heard about it, and he actually put some staff on it. And the next thing we knew, there was a climate protection agreement that was being circulated all throughout the country. Within about a year or so, Greg Nichols took it to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who then endorsed it as well. And while they haven't been as active on it in the last couple of years, there are over 1,000 U.S. cities that actually signed on to what I characterize as a Kyoto Protocol for cities.
And that got a good amount of press, as I recall, at the time.
It did, and it also created some momentum for cities to actually look at their greenhouse gas emissions that are produced either through transportation fuels or in buildings as a result of heating and cooling them. And many cities, to their credit, actually began to take that whole issue seriously. Berkeley's been great. Berkeley developed a climate action plan. The voters of this city passed Measure G in 2008, I believe it was, that basically gave the city a directive to start getting serious about reducing its emissions. It was a resolution or a measure that had received more votes than anything that's ever been on a Berkeley ballot before. So as a result of that, these cities doing these climate action plans, looking at their emissions and everything, began to develop some interest in at the county level and eventually in some places at the state level. And as you probably know, California now has AB 32, which is essentially addresses climate change in a significant way, and we're pretty soon the state's going to roll out a cap and trade program, and industries are going to have to start to ramp down on their emissions. I mean, it's a big step in many ways. California isn't alone. The whole most of the Northeast is united in a regional coalition of states that have already done a lot. On the West Coast, all the way from British Columbia to Mexico, those states are all involved in a similar regional effort. And it's got to work its way up to the federal government. We've seen mixed signals from the Obama administration on this. Their EPA has done a lot in trying to, for example, the EPA now considers greenhouse gases to be a type of emissions that they can actually control. Prior to, it was probably 2009, 2010, greenhouse gases were just emitted into the atmosphere. There was no requirement that they be controlled in any way. And now we're starting to see efforts to ramp those down. The problem is that, this has to be really an international effort. I mean, it can't just be Europe or a couple of states that are addressing greenhouse gas emissions. We are actually increasing emissions at such a rate that when you look at the various scenarios that the scientists have developed to show us what the future might look like. We are essentially on a trajectory that they call business as usual. I mean, it's almost as if we're making no effort whatsoever. And I mean,
it's hard to really understand how we can be so foolish.
Well, first of all, it's not a global response. I mean, the Europeans, I think, have taken it seriously. The Australians are beginning to take it seriously. In the U.S., I'd have to say that the economic concerns are the big driver. There's this fear that if we try to ramp down greenhouse gases, it's going to put a big dent in the economy.
Well, the corporations have too much power in the government.
Well, it's actually, Tom, there are a lot of corporations that are beginning to realize that there are implications for climate change that are going to affect their businesses. All the big insurance companies recognize it. There are plenty of companies out there that are beginning to see that, the future is looking kind of bleak in terms of what the impacts will be, and are beginning to coalesce around efforts to try and get, companies to start to consider reducing their greenhouse gases. The big industries, it's still coal and oil, that are responsible for the greatest portion of the emissions that the U.S. is responsible for. We're starting to see old coal plants shut down. It's getting harder and harder to permit new coal factories. Over the last couple of years, natural gas has become so cheap that it's actually supplanting a lot of the coal that's being used for, electricity.
Fracking is another issue.
Yeah. Well, it's fracking that's making the natural gas prices so cheap, and
Right, but it's a major problem too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's any effort to try and minimize the impacts of fossil fuels by either calling it clean coal or sequestration or fracking using natural gas. I mean, it's not really the solution. The solution is to find ways to cut down those emissions entirely, and also at the same time try to assure that we're not destroying the planet in other ways. The Amazon. Open spaces that sequester carbon and that kind of thing. We have to be the oceans, for example. I mean, a huge impact on sequestration of carbon, and they're actually, surpassing their limit in some ways. And so, it's an interesting period. I mean, we're seeing some positive movement in some areas, and in other areas, where we haven't been able to wean ourselves off our addiction to oil and that kind of thing.
It's interesting, Tom, that you seem very well informed on a global level, but you're also putting your efforts on a grassroots level, working with schools and putting solar panels on roofs.
Yeah. Well, I learned, I wish I'd learned this when I was younger, but I've learned in the last decade or so that, I can't change the world, not the big world. But there's a world we all live in, our families, our workplace, our communities, that's a world where we actually have some influence. And if we're willing to get in, pitch in, and actually take something on, it can take some time. It can be frustrating. It might not always work the first time you try it, But our experience has been that we've accomplished a lot here, first in this city, and I'm really excited about telling you about some of the things that have happened here. But also it's beginning to take on a life of its own in other parts of the Bay Area and other parts of the state. And at least for the work that we're doing that has, I think, modest implications, they're the kinds of things that just the average citizen can get involved in. It doesn't take a special science degree or a particular knowledge. It just takes a willingness to advocate for this kind of transition that we're trying to foster.
So there's a section on your site, it's the Helios project?
The Helios project, it's actually an acronym. It's, if you see it spelled out, it's all caps except for the I, and it means Helios Energy Lights Our Schools. And here's the story on schools, at least as far as I've been able to analyze it in the Bay Area, and I think it holds fairly true for the rest of the state. I won't speak for the rest of the country, but we have a lot of public schools that were built 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And these buildings tend to be inefficient energy users. You know, they leak heat or cold depending on the time of year. The equipment that's in it often isn't replaced frequently or when it should be, and so you wind up with inefficient boilers or heating and ventilation systems. And then you get the problem with school districts being strapped for money and everything and deferring a lot of the replacement or maintenance on these things. So you get schools that are in most communities that don't have a lot of industry, or they are some of the biggest consumers of energy in a community. And if you start to look at a place like Berkeley, Berkeley has, I think, 17 schools. When you look at the overall consumption of energy and its cost, you know, it's pretty significant. I didn't look at the numbers before tonight, but as I recall, Berkeley Unified School District spends over $1 million a year just on electricity. And I don't have the figures for natural gas. Fortunately, you know, we live in a moderate climate, and so we don't have the kind of issues that you might find in the Central Valley where you need a lot of air conditioning and heat and that kind of thing. I mean, we don't have those kinds of climate extremes or weather temperature extremes. So yet. So their consumption patterns are generally modest. But the thing about the physical structure of the schools is that they're great candidates for renewable energy systems in terms of solar panels. Big flat roofs, they don't have a lot on top of them. The larger schools, like the high schools, often have big parking lots where you can install solar. And we found that, first of all, school districts weren't paying much attention to their energy consumption. They saw it, I think, as just what they needed to keep the doors open. You got a bill from your utility every month, you paid it. You know, you had to. Couldn't afford to have the lights shut off or the heating turned off. And so as schools began to look at their budgets more closely and realize that they were cutting teachers and programs and everything, you know, the district started looking at all their expenses to see, you know, what else could be cut. And I think are beginning to realize that their energy bills are way out of whack with what they really need to operate a good school building that's comfortable for the kids and well lit. So just to step back a minute, we had gone from trying to get cities to sign on to this Kyoto Protocol, which is kind of trying to drive some policy, you know, trying to get cities to begin to adopt policies that would reduce emissions. But it's kind of divorced from our lives. I mean, we can't tell the city to, you know, overhaul its fleet of vehicles or whatever, you know, or we can't tell the city to, I mean, who would you tell? You go to Public Works or something like that. I mean, they don't take orders from the citizens, really. I mean, it's a whole, you know, it's hard.
Right.
So what we did was we thought, well, where could we actually do something that goes beyond advocating for something like Kyoto Protocol for cities and changing your light bulbs and, you know, taking public transportation. I mean, these are all good, but they're small. They're low-hanging fruit in some ways. So we started thinking about our schools and this energy issue, the fact that they seem to be consuming far more than they needed. They needed to reduce the costs. We also looked at how kids were responding to climate change. And I think this is one of the big kind of unaddressed issues of our time, and that is that I think kids are completely aware of climate change. And I think we as adults do them an incredible disservice by not doing anything to address it, you know?
I absolutely do now, and I totally agree with you. And I have a 6-year-old boy, and I think all the time about what his life's going to be like when he's my age. I'm 54. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's something that I think about a lot.
Yeah, well.
It seems that being in a school that's doing something powerful to address climate change is in itself just the right message for the kids.
Well, it gives them some assurance that the adults in their lives are actually taking this seriously. I mean, as they grow older and learn more about life, they'll realize that, you know, their parents and their teachers and their superintendents of schools couldn't do it all, but at least they were doing something, you know?
That's right.
And not, I mean, I can almost imagine a child, you know, 20 years from now saying to their parent, you know, what did you do? I mean, what were you doing? What were you thinking? I mean, we had all the knowledge, all the signs were there, the extreme weather that we're having, the migrations that are occurring in parts of the world because of the droughts and desertification and everything, you know? I mean, how do you answer something like that? I mean, that to me would just be enough motivation to just get up right now and go and do something, you know,
That's right.
to try and make it, to resolve it in some way.
Absolutely. So what's the hump? I mean, it's such a compelling argument. The hump must be the upfront investment.
Well, you know, there are a couple of ways. Let me just go back to Berkeley. I thought Berkeley would be, you know, kind of easy. Our idea was we'll go to Berkeley Unified and we'll say to them, we figured out a way to get you solar panels on Washington Elementary, and it won't cost you anything more than what you're paying for your utilities now, for a certain period of time. And after that, you'll begin to save, you know, on your utility bills, and eventually you'll own the system, and you'll harvest all the benefits of the ownership of the system. And it was kind of a, you know, a long year. It was kind of a 20-year plan, and you know, it worked for me. But you know, school districts have to deal in reality. You know, they need to be able to. They don't want to take any risks.
You need that first one.
Huh? Pardon
you
me?
needed that first one or two.
And we went to Berkeley Unified, and we met with Michelle Lawrence, the superintendent there. It took us a long time to get a meeting, and she was very personable and everything. And she said to me at that first meeting, she said, "Tom, I got to tell you, I really admire your passion and your enthusiasm for this." She said, "But you know, our mission here is to teach kids. I don't understand what the relationship is between greenhouse gases and our role to teach kids, or energy. You know, it's completely, it's like a foreign language to me, you know." So I said, "Well, I tell you what, Michelle, if you think that this might have some benefit for you, then just tell me all the impediments there are that you can think of to making this work, these, you know, getting solar on Washington Elementary." So she and her staff gave me all the arguments, and we went out and tried to figure out how to respond to them. We got experts in finance and solar and everything to help us understand how this might all work for them and everything. And this is, to me, kind of an interesting lesson about getting started on something when you don't know where it's going to wind up. The facilities director at the time, and still is Lou Jones, and he was in on these meetings, and he and the chief financial officer didn't really say much during these meetings. But something in our discussion triggered, you know, this effect in Lou, where he started thinking about, well, how could we make this work, you know? Before he was like indifferent, and I've learned over time now, working with a lot of facilities directors, they're amazing people. I mean, keeping these schools open and running and safe and everything is like, it would, you know, you need 10 people like that to do it every day, you know? But, so when they see me coming, they think, more work, you know? They're going to try and lay something on me that I don't have time to do, you know? So
Right.
It's like us, you know, you don't respond, you don't engage, you don't offer anything because you're afraid you're going to get sucked into something that you're going to regret. So Lou went home one night, and he tells the story, he says he woke up in the middle of the night with a kind of an aha moment, you know. He said he figured out how to pay for the system. The school district was eligible for some modernization funds from the state. So, and it's a kind of a match program. So if you had a project that say cost $100,000, the state would give you 60, but you'd have to come up with the other 40. So Lou figured, okay, I can get the 60 from the state, the rebate from the utility was about 20, you know, and then he had a little bit of bond money left over that he hadn't allocated for projects that he could apply to it, and it all added up to the 100, or you know, in this case it was closer to $900,000 because they did a new roof, re-roofed and
That was
everything.
a bigger expense than the panels.
So, but nevertheless, you see, when we got started on this project, Lou was kind of indifferent to it, and then
You got into his subconscious.
something happened,
Yeah,
you know.
the unconscious. That was my last interview, where it's all about the unconscious. So, you know, you got to get into get him thinking.
You know, once, and that's the thing about climate change, about this whole transition that we have to make to, you know, less consumption, more renewables, that kind of thing, a simpler life, is it's really all in our heads, you know. It's not that we don't have the technology or the skill or the wherewithal to be able to make this change, either personally or as a city or as a country. It's just our attitude towards it, I believe, you know.
I think people know in their bones on some level that we need to do something. And so, yeah, if you can present a powerful case. And also when that Berkeley Unified School District Director said, well, my business is to teach kids, it seems that a very powerful response would be just what you said earlier, that isn't it important to teach our kids what we can do about climate change?
Mm-hmm. Well, what happened is that we did have a couple of meetings after that first meeting. In that first meeting, she said, Tom, I've got a to-do list that has 40 things on it, and you're not on it, you know? So that's when I said to her, tell me everything that, you know, that I need to resolve for you to make you more interested. And the next time I met with her, perhaps she had forgotten she had said that to me. She said, Tom, I have a to-do list with 40 things on it, and you're only number 38. And I said, Michelle, we're on our way, you know? I mean,
she sounds wonderfully frank.
She was amazing. Within, I think it was 3 or 4 months, I got an email from her that said that she realized how important this was, that she felt it was her moral and obligation to do this and do it as well as she could, not just at Washington, but throughout the whole district. I mean, it was like she had gone through this conversion process. And I have to tell you, Tom, most school districts go through something like that when they're thinking about solar. We've done this now with, you know, half a dozen school districts, and we see the same sort of process. You know, it goes from either indifference or hostility sometimes. People have notions about what solar is and what it costs and everything that they thought they knew a year ago, but you know, the reality is this industry is moving so rapidly that what you knew a year ago doesn't hold up anymore. But they go through this process, and you can begin to see them soften. And they begin to, and the key issue really is around the economics. If they can be convinced that it's an economically sound decision to do it, then what's interesting is that kind of falls away. It's kind of like the booster on a rocket. It kind of, you know, falls away. And then the issues like climate change, doing something responsible for the kids, being green, you know, all that kind of thing begins to it becomes front and center. And that is when the school gets really excited. They start doing other things other than the solar. The solar is like the catalyst for it. And then they want to do a green academy, or they want to do composting, or they want to do recycling, whatever it is. You know, it's like a motivator for people. You know?
Great. Oh, that's just great, Tom. You're doing fantastic work. Well, where are you at with the different school districts? How about Oakland?
Well, here's what happened. It took us 2 years to get solar up on Washington Elementary. And I said to my wife, Jane, who's the co-founder of KyotoUSA, I said, you know, we don't have that many years left. I mean, if it took us 2 years to do an elementary school, we're only going to get like 4 or 5 more schools in before we run out of steam, you know. So we thought, you know, we have to figure out a way to take what we've learned and integrate it into the entire district. So here's the scenario, Tom, just to show you the juxtaposition. You're a parent, your child goes to a public school, it's got a nice roof, you want to do solar, and you go to the school and you say, let's do solar at my school. Well, they're going to be sympathetic to that, they're going to wish that they could do something. But they've got construction needs and obligations throughout that whole district. And they've probably developed a facilities master plan somewhere along the way that lays out what they're going to do in year 1, 2, 3. They're going to replace a building here, they're going to build a cafeteria there, they're going to tear down a school there, all those kinds of things.
Prioritized.
And they're going to have the money to do that, often through a general obligation bond that the voters of that city or that school district approve. So we realized that somehow or another we were going to have to get our notion of solar on schools integrated into that facilities master plan. It had to either be an addendum to it, or better yet, it had to be blended into that so that it was just part and parcel of what the school district was going to do over a period of time. So we heard about a grant called the Solar America Showcase program from the Department of Energy. It was a technical assistance grant, so there was no money in it involved. It was just they gave us access to a project manager at the National Renewable Energy Labs in Golden, Colorado.
Right.
And for 2 years, we worked with them to develop these solar master plans for Berkeley, West Contra Costa, and Oakland Unified School Districts. And it was an amazing process. We had the facilities directors from all 3 schools involved. We met on a pretty regular basis. For a while there, we were meeting twice a month, but over time we would sort of scaled it back to a month. But we looked at every aspect of a solar transaction and then characterized it in a way that it just fit nicely into the district's overall facilities master plan.
Very nice.
So, and to give you an example of how that worked in Berkeley, Berkeley took the early version of our plan and used that as a basis for justifying an amount they asked of Berkeley voters in 2010 to approve a larger bond. I think it was about $220 million, but they included about $8 million in there for solar projects. So then, the money's there. You don't have to worry about where it's going to come from if there's going to be a grant. The other way to buy or to get solar on your school is to do what they call a third-party purchase, formerly known as a power purchase agreement. And that's really where an investor comes in and puts solar panels on your school's roof, and you buy your electricity not from PG&E but from the investor, and they give you a little break. You get your electricity at a penny or two less a kilowatt hour than you would get from your utility. But frankly, Tom, I won't say that we're opposed to that in general. But for schools, we encourage them to look at owning their system themselves rather than just being a host for a system that belongs to someone else.
Right.
I think in the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to see solar on, virtually every school in the state of California.
Fantastic. Well, Tom, thanks so much for coming here and
glad
telling us about that.
Yeah,
Hope you come
us.
back and keep
Thanks.
us informed.
I'll be glad to, Tom.
All right,
Thank you
very
very
good.
much.
And thank you for watching. Good night.